Hi, welcome back. This is Andrew Sears again. And in this next part, I'm going to talk about Tech Mission and City Vision as a case study and a board managing risk and protecting the mission. So, City Vision is a part of a Christian nonprofit 501c3 organization called Tech Mission. And I'll talk a little bit about the history. So, how the board's related to me. So I was the founder of Tech Mission. So it's been supportive of me serving as an executive director led model. Some organizations are more like a board led model. So they have had some trust there. The board largely serves as a sounding board and source of advice and support. It's been critical for me to have our board embody our values and was guardian of our values. That's, from my perspective, one of the number one things. We've had a very supportive, healthy relationship between the board and myself. One of the things that I would say makes my approach to the board unique is, so City Vision's two programs are nonprofit management and addiction counseling. It's not by chance that, I'm the president. So I've run a nonprofit for 20 years. I've worked with hundreds of nonprofits. I also went through addiction recovery. And as a part of that, I value complete transparency on both organizational issues and personal issues. So I have sought the board as a source of personal and organizational accountability. I would summarize that in the phrase, I know my own weaknesses and I know enough to know that I need to be accountable. And cases, some examples of that are, I'll be in a meeting. I want to make sure I don't lose my temper. I realize whenever I have power as an executive director that, that also gives me the power to hurt people. I try to include board members or other people so that I don't, lose it in those, whether it be with partners or, in other cases. So I'm going to go through and talk about the different stages of City Vision. So I mentioned that, organizations go through various stages. So, this is probably not exactly the profile we had, but this is the startup profile, the standard startup profile. And so some of the aspects of our profile. So we're a faith-based organization. From 2000 to 2013, 70% of our funding came from government grants. Our board was 100% evangelical. Our staff was 100% Christian. Most of those would probably be evangelical. Our interns, we didn't have any faith criteria, but it ended up being maybe 80 to 90% were Christian. And if you look at from the Wesleyan quadrilateral, our worldview order would be scripture, reason, experience, tradition. So what were the risks given that? So we had one government OIG, Office of Inspector General audit. That turned out clean. One government OIG investigation. We were cleared for that. We also faced a power struggle with staff. There's and you can hear this more in depth in my cross-cultural management, but so we had a large, we were founded in Boston. So we had MIT and Harvard. So we had a good number of staff in our early days that came from elite schools that were more in the leftist reason camp. And ultimately the other risk was, I entered recovery in 1996. The organization was started in 2002, so that was 6 years into recovery. But I recognized that was 6 years, into my own recovery, and I valued a lot the growth that the board, provided in that. So, what were the key actions? We, prioritized staff and recruitment to better fit with our core values. So that's some of the things that we did. The board advised on key staff conflicts. Now, what are the chances of an organization receiving these, an audit and investigation like we got? They say it's 1 in 100, but the chances of us getting 2 of those was pretty clear. What happened was there was a change in administration between the Bush and the Obama administration where all of a sudden, I mentioned that being a faith-based organization, it became a little bit like living in the Gaza Strip. So that's the barrier between Israel and Palestine. And it's the battle between the left and the right, and we were left living there. So ultimately, we had several different challenges, but ultimately, one of the key things that we did was we decided to walk away from 3/4 of our budget, because AmeriCorps, the way they were changing, they couldn't actually get us to change any of our policies, but what they could do is they made it clear that they would, because we were a faith-based organization, they were going to investigate us as often as they possibly could, and that was just going to take up all of our time, and it was going to be stressful. So at the end of the day, we decided to walk away from 3/4 of our budget. We had about a $2 million budget. We walked away from that rather than compromise our organizational mission. So that created a challenge. As I mentioned, our big challenge was that we were very focused on keeping it real. So I grew up poor, and I often have described my background similar to the artist Eminem, who's a white guy who grew up in a black community. For me, it was easier to relate to our clients. But what happened is, being too flexible creates too much risk in too many domains. So ultimately, we've had to move more in the direction of resources to create balance. And at the end of the day, I'm not just trying to get money. At the end of the day, I want to serve clients, and I want to be balanced and have health so that we're able to effectively serve clients. So that's part of what the pivot was from that happened around 2013. So in 2008, we acquired City Vision University. We were given it by the Association of Gospel Rescue Missions. It was originally called Rescue College, and we completely changed our funding profile. We realized the risk was being too high getting government grants, so we went from 70% government funding to closer to 40%, and that was a radical shift. So again, our board was 100% evangelical, our staff and profile, 100% Christian. I would say here our worldview order shifted to where we didn't have as many staff from Harvard and places like that. So we started to become much more practical focused, and rather than theory focused. And the key risk that we faced during this season, federal aid review. And what we found is that if you are a small organization taking federal loans, then you have a giant target on your back, especially if you're a faith-based organization. So ultimately what that did is it also created another challenge around staff burnout. And so we decided to walk away from federal loans because they weren't in line with our values, largely our justice value, and that they encouraged, the way the government worked, it was an entitlement, and we had to give students loans, the maximum amount of loans, even if we knew that the loan was not being used effectively or not needed, the way the government worked. So we walked away from 75% of our funding because of secularization risk, and we focused on the growth of our earned income is what we did. And we really moved from the previous profile to this pink profile here. So we're very focused on innovation, some on market, and where we're trying to go from 2016 now or 2017 to now is this blue profile. So what we shifted there was we dropped all federal loans. As I mentioned, we try to increase our donations. The key risk, still the federal aid review, limited budget staff turnout. And the key action was we dropped federal loans. We invested heavily to shift organization to stability and control. So what's the strategic response? I'm investing hugely in trying to move us in this direction. A lot of, I don't enjoy this, to be honest, but it's what our organization needs. So in creating lots of policies, a lot of procedures, a lot of details, hiring people who are good at this. And then also moving us in this direction. We need to be more competitive. That's part of why we increase our tuition somewhat. But honestly, a lot of it's going to be, so many people have told me a lot of people don't know about CityVision. You need to get the word out more. So that's a lot of what we're trying to do. So if you take these risk to faith-based organizations, okay, how do those relate to, what the board's done? And the closing from limited financial resources. So that hasn't been our number one risk, but honestly, our board hasn't done that well. That's, right now, one of the things that I could use the most from our board. The burnout or loss of a key leader. Ultimately, what our board has done well is they've been an amazing support for me to help me avoid, burnout. A moral failure of a key leader, accountability and executive director support. If I'm having issues of, potentially self-medicating in some way, not with, illegal drugs, but in any other way, people find behavioral addictions. I try to be transparent with both accountability partners and at times with the board if I feel like it's, getting more significant. So, as I mentioned in our history, there's a time whenever there's a lot of conflict. So, the board supporting organizational health, the biggest issue that we did ultimately was try not to overreach cross-culturally. Our board provides really good fiscal oversight. We've had audits or reviewed financials every year of our history. We're an intermediary, so really the main sexual misconduct issue is with staff because we don't interact directly with clients other than, online. But we also have a policy for that. Secularization and mission drift, we have hiring policies and board selection to keep people in line with our values. Government investigation, we increase our fiscal oversight and policies. Lawsuits right now, just having basic risk management. Slow death from irrelevance, that's not a risk, as much of a risk for us. That's something we're really good at is changing, so we didn't need that. Being cross-culturally ineffective, out of 100 AmeriCorps organizations, we were the most reflective of the poverty statistics in the United States. That wasn't an issue for us. So ultimately, that's how we tried to shift our board. The things I wish for our board, at the end of the day, we need to shift as an organization down to the market sector. They need to help us not just in getting more students, but especially in getting more grants and things along those lines. So that's what we're trying to shift. But in general, I'm investing a lot in our own board development. So hopefully you found this helpful. And if you have any other questions, you can ask your faculty member, and be sure to do the final project assignment for this week. So thanks a lot.